va s'intéresser à la sécurité dans l'open source. C'est une question qui revient souvent. Et pour en parler avec nous, on accueille le Chief Solution Architect de Sonatype, monsieur David Jones.
Bonjour. My talk will definitely be in English. My French is appalling, so apologies for that. Today I am here. I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I work for a company called Sonatype, and one of the things we have the pleasure of doing is being the custodians of the Maven Central repository. So we see the use of open source Java, some statistics and metrics on how much is being used. And then we have the results of a survey, which I'm going to talk about some of that today as well. And all of this is going to cover some of the security within open source and some considerations. I think for this audience, hopefully a lot of it will be pretty common sense. But it's still interesting to talk about because we see the evidence that behavior is only changing very slowly. So over the 4-year study, we have collected the opinions and views of over 11,000 people, and they've shared this with us. I apologize. So I should cover this, even though I'm sure everyone here knows why open source, and this is important as we talk about security. Understanding motivations is key. When some of the key drivers for using open source, and there are lots, but the things I want to talk about today is that we want to get to the desired outcome using the least amount of effort with the smallest total cost, and sometimes in the shortest possible time, but that's certainly not always true. There are lots of other reasons why people use open source: to be part of a community, to get involved in something, to learn. But when looking at enterprises and business, it's certainly key that we look at the effort and cost involved. As part of the survey, we asked people how much of their software they thought was open source, so how much of their assembled software was open source. And the number they came back with was 90%. I think this number is high, but whether it is 70, 80, or 90%, certainly a lot of the software used today is constructed using a lot of open source. So how does security fit into this, and why is this important? Why did I have to cover why we're using so much open source? I went to a fantastic talk last week by a guy called Douglas Crockford, and he was talking about JavaScript, the good bits, the bad bits, and some of the motivation behind what developers do. And he talked about the good things in programming and the not so good things in programming, and that what developers thought when they're thinking about creating defect-free software. And he came up with this great phrase, and for some developers, certainly not all, there is an approach to development which includes a view on security, which he called danger-driven development. And this is where there isn't enough consideration on how our software is constructed. So I looked at this, and when we think about security in our software and we think about security defects, we have unmanaged risk. And unmanaged risk is really just a form of technical debt. And with technical debt, we have less efficiency, as we all know, just as with any defect. And we have cost, whether it's today or in the future. At some point with this technical debt, we have to resolve it, we have to fix it, and this is cost. So a group of us got together, and we tried to come up with a useful algorithm that people could use to look at how they should approach their open source development. And so this is a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but if you have lots of something, if people are claiming that 90% of their software is made up of open source, and people are not taking consideration of the risk in their software, then we end up with lots of cost. And this is just a repeatable pattern. When writing software, when constructing software of open source, we should be aware of the avoidable cost. None of this is stuff that we can't solve, can't resolve. So we should be aware of the avoidable cost. But we should actively manage as well the avoidable risk. This is a lot of the risk that we see in software is risk that can be quite easily resolved by using later versions. So as part of this survey, there was a view on how people are enabling open source for enterprises, enabling open source for their organizations. And half of organizations continue to run without an open source policy. So it's all well and good saying that there are things that we have to do in terms of license considerations or copy left or security or vulnerabilities, but still, from the results from the survey, half of organizations continue to run without a policy at all. And only 21% of organizations have to prove they're using secure components within their software. So at least 41% of organizations are saying that you should avoid software with vulnerabilities. When you're using open source software, avoid vulnerabilities. But then 21% are saying, however, you have to prove it to us. And why is this important? Well, from the 11,000 people that we surveyed, or that were surveyed, lots of people were saying we already manage our risk. We have a process within our organization. Someone checks the software is okay before we use it. The problem with this approach is that the software you use today may have a new vulnerability tomorrow or next week or in the future. And a majority of developers are not tracking the vulnerabilities within software over time. So the software you get today, it could be fine. Someone could have made a decision. Someone could have sat there and reviewed it and decided that it was okay to use in a production system, in a critical system, in a payment system. But then, as things change, people aren't checking and reviewing software. And over the past 12 months, 373 participants believed they either had or they suspected they had a breach within their systems. Again, another thing worth noting is that last year we saw tens of millions of vulnerable pieces of software being downloaded and used in systems globally. So within the survey, there's a few hundred people, but we know that vulnerable software is being actively used everywhere. So what next? What happens? What do we do? And the key to this is that open source has huge value. It's the future. It's where things are going, and everyone is trying to get involved with open source more and more. But we have to be aware of these risks, and these risks will prevent organizations from using open source. If you lack confidence in what you're using, if you do not manage appropriately what you're using, then ultimately large organizations will fear the use of open source software. So you should have a strategy for enabling open source within your organization. You should sit down and think about how you want to use open source and how you want to build it into your software. And write it down as well so everyone knows. Within the software you have today, understand what you're using. Find out if there are things that you need to address and things you need to change. If you do come up with a process, like how you get open source software into your organization or how you assess it, make it predictable. Make sure that the person knows why they can or cannot use something because of licenses, because of vulnerabilities, because of security. And make that process repeatable so you get the same results and you can repeat this. And automate it so that it's quick. And a phrase which has been overused, but it's still so true, which is to make the right way the easy way. Get the people with the right skills involved in the right places. Don't just give someone a large spreadsheet and say, please fix all our open source problems with our software. Turn that data into information, make it usable for people, and give it to the developers who are actually creating the software. Give them the information they need so they can make the informed decisions. And as I said, things change over time. No decision should be a point-in-time decision. So utilize iterative risk management. Make sure you're constantly reassessing what you're using. And with the process, make it fast. Make sure you're not blocking people, being obstructive. You still want to drive innovation. And make it precise so that the results you get are as accurate as you can at the time you do them. And make sure it's contextual as well. Make the decisions based on the thing you're assessing, the thing you're looking at, the process you're performing, and its use. Some of the best solutions, some of the best things we use are the ones that seem invisible to most people. So when you're looking at putting in processes or practices that do any form of control with risk or security, try and make them invisible to the user, or as near as possible. Reduce the friction as much as possible in what people are doing, so that when you try and do the right thing, it brings benefit as well as reducing risk and security. There are lots more metrics and stats I could have talked about from the survey, far too many to cover in 15 minutes. But if you would like to see the rest of the results, then please do go down and go and download the report, or feel free to talk to me as well. And finally, thank you all for your time, and build safely. Thank you.